This is it. So guys, I'm about to explain 3 reasons for why I switched, and I believe many of you should really seriously consider switching to a higher frequency program. We are talking training 1.5, 2, or even more times per week for each muscle group. And in turn, this involves cutting back on the volume. I know a lot of times I talk about how bodybuilding is volume. You need to do more exercises, more reps, and in turn, you're going to need more rest time. They're kind of like a trade-off, frequency and volume. In fact, there was a great little informal interview done with Matt Ogus and Eric Helms, and he kind of talked about how there is essentially a trade-off. If you are going to have more volume, for example, you're doing legs and you're doing like 25 total sets, maybe you're doing 5 exercises, 5 sets each, which is, that's a lot. You're going to be in the gym for like an hour and a half minimum. You're going to be done. You're going to be toast. It's probably not in your best interest to get back in the gym and train legs, for a reasonable amount of time, which is why people take usually, 5, 6, 7 days off before they train again, because they really feel they need that, that adequate recovery time. On the other hand, if you train frequency, training legs, for example, once every 3 to 4 days, you can do that, but you're going to have shorter workouts. Instead of doing 25 total sets, you may have to do something like 12, 14, 16. We're talking, for example, 4 exercises, 3 sets each, or something like that. Your workouts are going to be shorter, as long as you keep up the intensity. You may be in the gym for as little as 45 minutes. This means that you can train multiple times per week, for example, twice per week, or maybe something a little bit less, like 1.5 times per week. That's pretty much you train, instead of twice per week, you train 3 times every 2 weeks. So it's like 3 over 2, you get the picture. So that's great and all, but why is this better and why should you guys listen to me? Let's get into some of the reasons. Number 1, muscle protein synthesis. This has been mentioned a couple times in the past, but this is the first time I've really looked into it. But there's a great scientific article I want to mention for you guys. This is Exercise, Protein Metabolism, and Muscle Growth, published in the International Journal of Sports Nutrition and Exercise. So it says, and I quote, "The response of muscle protein metabolism to a resistance exercise lasts about 24 to 48 hours. Thus, the interaction between protein metabolism and any meals consumed in this period will determine the impact of the diet on muscle hypertrophy." So what this is essentially saying is that once you work out, obviously all the food and protein you consume, it's all important. It's all like this one, it's this teamwork, this network of things which have to happen. You have to exercise, you have to sleep, you have to consume protein, you have to consume calories, and that's great. But it seems like according to this article, it only really matters for 24 to 48 hours, meaning that after that maximum, 2-day span of time, you're essentially just resting. Guys, one thing I can say beyond a shadow of a doubt from personal experience and through my research is that when it comes to building your physique, bodybuilding, men's physique, whatever you call it, you always need to maximize the utilization of your resources. Maximize how much protein you are using. Maximize how much utility you get out of training. Maximize how many times you can train or how much you can train. Maximize how much weight you can actually lift, your rest, your sleep, everything. So essentially, if you are training once every 7 days, 7 times 24 is a number that I can't calculate in my head. 48 hours is the only amount of time you really need at the most, which means that anything past that, you're essentially resting just for the sake of resting. Now, I know a lot of you guys may say, well, I need that time because I feel tired, I have other prior engagements, I can't work out 400 times per week, or I just have DOMS, which is delayed onset muscle soreness. Pretty much just you're sore, I can't work out, it hurts, whatever. We will get to that in a minute, but according to this article, essentially, if you want to absolutely maximize the relationship between protein synthesis, muscle synthesis, 48 hours is the maximum time, maximum amount of time you need. Theoretically, after that, you could start training again. And if you maximize this, you maximize gains, theoretically, so good. Number 2, in my opinion, is the most important factor and pretty much the nail in the metaphorical coffin for why I think training higher frequency is a little bit better than training higher volume, but less frequency, less times per week. And that is simply better workouts and heavier weight lifted. A great example of this is the Bulgarian method of squat training, but again, this can pertain to any type of exercise theoretically. It was obviously invented and created by the Bulgarians. I don't remember who exactly, maybe I'll throw up a name here. But it was popularized recently, and I came to know of it through a program offered by Omar Isuf and Greg Knuckles, 2 guys who are way smarter than me, so if you want to check them out, that's not a bad idea. Now, although it's referred to as the Bulgarian method, another very simplistic way of referring to it is simply squat every day. Yeah. When I heard it, I'm like, oh, okay, I get it. You're batshit crazy. You want me to do probably the hardest, the most physically taxing exercise, the thing where you put the most amount of weight you can on your back, go down, try your best not to die and get back up, and you want me to do that every day at a reasonably high intensity? And the program is pretty much like, yeah. So the point of this program and why it pertains to this video specifically as, and I quote, maximize fitness accrual while minimizing fatigue accrual. So essentially, like, get the most amount of bang for your buck. Your buck pretty much meaning, like, you know, what you have to expend, which is fatigue, because let's be honest, we all get tired, both in your workout and in your week in general. When looking at gains in muscle size, doing 4 to 6 sets of an exercise results in about 80% larger effect size than just doing a single set. So, you know, you guys may think 80% more, that's great, but you're doing 4 to 6 times the actual effort. So wouldn't you, through logic, expect 400 to 600% of the muscle gains? That is not the case. The most beneficial set is the first one, with additional benefits decreasing with each additional set. Guys, this may be the one most important thing that I want you to take away from this video. If you forget everything else, why would you do that? But if you remember this, that is the most important thing. This is the concept of diminishing returns over time. It's the law of diminishing returns. It's actually economics principle, but it applies here nonetheless. Pretty much this says that your first set is the most important. Your first set of your first exercise. Everything after that is, it's very important, but not equally as important. And over time, the more and more you do, the less and less significant and important and helpful it becomes. And to really explain and help you guys visualize this, we need to go into the hyperbolic time chamber. Got it. Alright, much better. Okay guys, so for the purposes of this demonstration, there are 2 variables you need to understand. Number 1 is muscle gains, and number 2 is muscle fatigue. And the absolute biggest problem, which is why I advocate higher frequency training, is the fact that fatigue is a linear equation. Pretty much the more you do, you're progressively at the same rate going to fatigue more and more. Whereas muscle gains is not the same case. Like I said, diminishing returns, and they diminish quickly, which means you get a lot of benefit in the beginning, less, and then it drops like a rock. It's actually a negative exponential equation. If you guys remember back into high school, like math and calculus, this is kind of like that. This is important because if you plot both of these variables, these functions, onto a graph, your gains are going to be high in the beginning, but they drop like a rock, and fatigue catches up very quickly, and eventually there's an intersection point. And after that intersection point, you're going to have the negatives outweigh the positives, and it's no longer in your best interest to continue training. Okay guys, let's go into a quantitative example to illustrate this point. So let's say option number 1, you are doing more volume, you are training longer, and you are training less frequently. Let's call this sets 1, 2, and 3. By the way guys, this is just a random example I made up. This has absolutely no real world application. These are just some numbers which I think really help illustrate this point. So your fatigue, because it is a linear function, you get the same amount of fatigue after every set. It's going to go up, let's just say a random variable x. So x. Your final fatigue is 3x. Now, let's talk about gains. In the beginning, let's say a random number, 40%. That is awesome. That is a lot of, muscle gains, strength gains, everything is good. Your next set number 2, 25%. So still not a bad amount, but it's almost half as much as set 1. And then afterwards, we're going to go down to 15% for set 3. So, it's going to keep going lower and lower and lower. Essentially, if you were to keep this going until set number 10, your gains would be like a fraction of what they were in the beginning. And eventually, somewhere around here, sets 3, 4, 5, wherever, just a random number, your fatigue is going to overtake your actual gains. And at that point, you're pretty much doing counterproductive activity. All right, option B. Let's say you are doing higher frequency with less volume. So we got sets 1, 1, and 1 because this is one set but done on different days. Essentially, you can call it days 1, 2, and 3. Now, your gains are still going to be 40%, 40%, 40% because these are separate days. Every time you kind of recharge and you come back and you're able to work out with maximum intensity every single time. Your fatigue, similar case, X, X, and X. All right guys, what does this all mean? Let's go over our 2 options. Option number 1, we have final fatigue at 3x. X per set adds up, do the math. Your final muscle gains is a total of 80%, not bad. Option number 2, we have XXX. Our muscle gain, because it's 40% every time, adds up to a whopping 120%. So you have 2 different options, same level of physical exhaustion and fatigue, but in this case, again, random example, 40% more muscle gains, more strength gains. Overall, this is better.